My name is Lawrence Daly. I am a forensic child sexual abuse investigator, interviewer, and educator. The following is going to be a diagram on the investigations and interviewing of an investigative child sexual abuse interview. There will be criteria that I want you to consider when you investigate or interview child sexual abuse allegations. Investigative interviewing consists of interviewers who have to interview victims, witnesses, and suspects. They are an essential part of the investigation and judicial process. It is the quality and fairness of these interviews that determine whether or not justice is served. Interrogation is a confrontational process and is used in the context of perpetrator interviews. Victim and witnesses are interviewed, which implies that their interviews are relatively free of confrontation and accusation. Victims, witnesses, and suspects are all potentially important factual witnesses in the investigative and judicial process. Expectations. Witnesses and victims are required to recall events they observed, whereas perpetrators who are possibly involved in the child sexual abuse incidences are expected to focus more on their actions and intentions. Police expect a certain amount of pressure, deception, persuasion, and manipulation, which is essential if the truth is to be revealed. Furthermore, they view persuasive interrogation techniques as essential to police work and feel justified in using them. There is an absence of guidelines in how victims and witnesses are interviewed, whereas perpetrators are guarded against self-incrimination because of their constitutional rights, making interviewing of them sometimes difficult because they have the right to remain silent. Confessions to police have two main advantages for the criminal justice system. First, they greatly increase the likelihood that defendants are going to be convicted. Second, they often mean that victims and the witnesses do not have to give evidence in court. A self-incriminating which does not amount to the suspect accepting responsibility for the crime and giving a detailed narrative account of his or her action is not a proper confession. It is only after the person has confessed that the ego begins to accept emotional significance of the deed. A confession serves the function of receiving the person from the feeling of guilt and is inherently therapeutic. The Reid technique. Lie detection and criminal investigation model. There's a 9-step process in the Reid model. 1. Direct positive confrontation. 2. Theme development. 3. Stopping denials. 4. Procure the suspect's attention to the theme. 5. Overcoming objections. 6. Getting suspect's attention. 7. The suspect quiets and listens. 8. Alternatives, bringing the suspect into the conversation. And 9. The confession. Over 300,000 interviewers have been trained in the Reid technique since 1974. It relies heavily on psychological manipulation, including deliberately lying to suspects. Critique of the Reid technique and other similar techniques and point to inherent dangers. That is, being a guilt presumptive process, over-reliance on behavioral signs as indicators of deception, and the use of trickery, deceit, and theme development, which does on occasions result in false confessions. Dr. Conjunctions from the United Kingdom, specifically Ireland, in 2003 stated that confessions go wrong for the following reasons. A confession, even if true, is ruled inadmissible during voir dire, a trial without a trial, a suppression hearing due to the coercive nature or unfairness of the interrogation and custodial confinement. the eliciting of false confessions and a miscarriage of justice, unfair pressure resulting in resentment, causing the suspect to retract the confession even if true and failing to cooperate with the police in the future. Pressure or coercion resulting in the suspect developing a post-traumatic stress disorder. The undermining of public confidence in the police due to the publicized cases of miscarriages of justice. Poor interviewing resulting in suspects failing to give a confession when they would otherwise do so. For example, suspects who would have confessed in their own time refuse to confess when they feel they are being rushed or unfairly treated by the police. And lastly, suspects who have already confessed may retract their confession when they feel they are pressured too much to provide further information. This phenomenon is known as the boomerang effect. Confessions. Whether to speak or remain silent. Whether to tell the truth or not. Whether to tell the whole truth or only part of the truth. How to answer the questions asked by the police interrogator. Taken together, the models suggest that suspects confess when they perceive that the evidence against them is strong, when they need to relieve feelings of guilt, when they have difficulties coping with the custodial pressure, that is, interrogation and confinement, and when they focus primarily on the immediate consequences of their actions rather than the long-term ones. An inaccurate account can result in the wrong suspect being arrested, questioned, and on occasions wrongly convicted. Most perpetrators are reluctant to confess because of the shame associated with what they have done and the fear of the legal consequences. Research among convicted criminals demonstrates that there are three main reasons why suspects confess to crimes they have not committed. Number one, the suspects believe in the strength of the evidence against them. Number two, the internal need to confess, particularly in violent and sex crimes, makes them confess. Thirdly, custodial and interrogative pressures. Experts speculate that when guilty suspects feel they are treated humanly, they are more likely to confess, particularly when interviewed in relation to sensitive crimes such as sexual offenses and murder. Conjohnson argues that some sex molesters have a strong need to talk about their crimes due to feelings of guilt, and this gives the police an advantage. However, they also find it difficult to be open and honest when interrogated due to feelings of shame, which act to inhibit them from confessing. This means that they are torn between feelings of guilt, which encourages them to confess, and feelings of shame, which inhibit them from confessing. Their feelings of shame need to overcome during the interrogation. This means that sex offenders need to be interviewed sensitively and skillfully. Challenges will need to be presented in a soft or gentle fashion and with the apparent understanding of the perpetrator's perspective and emotional needs. Research has shown that the more serious the offense, the more likely the police are to use persuasive techniques to break down resistance found for interrogation tactics were particularly effective in eliciting a confession from suspects. Those four are as follows: appealing to the suspect's concerns, appealing to the suspect's conscience. Number two, identifying and pointing out contradiction in the suspect's denial and story. Number three, offering moral justifications or psychological excuse for the crime. And number four, using praise and flattery. The more time and effort the interviewer puts into the interrogation process, the greater the likelihood that a confession will be elicited. Perpetrator's decision-making process is determined by the following criteria. the course of action perceived by the suspect to be available at the time, the perceived subjective probabilities of the likely occurrence of various consequences attached to these courses of action, the gains or utility values attached to these courses of action. Threats and inducements can markedly influence the suspect's decision to confess because of the perceived power the police have over the situation and the apparent credibility of their words. And finally, England's investigative interviewing format approach has 7 principles. 1. The objective of the investigative interview is to obtain accurate and reliable accounts from victims, witnesses, and suspects in order to discover the truth about the subject matter under investigation. Number 3. The interviewer must always act fairly in the circumstances of each case. Number 4. The interviewer is not obliged to accept the first answer given, and persistent questioning does not have to be seen as unfair. Number 5. The officer has the right to put questions to the suspect even in cases where the suspect chooses to exercise his or her right to silence. Number 6. During interviews, officers are free to ask questions to ascertain the truth, except in cases of child victims of sexual or violent abuse, which are to be used in criminal proceedings. And number 7, victims, witnesses, and suspects who are vulnerable must always be treated with special consideration. Thank you.